Ladies and gentlemen, this Red Gaming Telecom video, we're going to be further discussing the Xbox One. Microsoft are telling us that our long-term vision hasn't changed at all. Phil Harrison has been giving an interview in which he's been discussing indie development, the DVR, the plans for self-publishing, and much more. So the first thing he said is that right now they're giving away development kits and they're loaning them to teams, but they'll have to most likely pass some kind of qualification, in other words testing, to demonstrate that they're actually, a good development team and worthy of a free dev kit. And they've also said that currently that process is ongoing, but Microsoft's eventual goal, and I actually quite like this, is they want every single retail Xbox One console to become a development kit so that they can appeal to the widest audience of developers possible. However, Phil also said within hours it was hundreds. I don't know how the number now, but I'm assuming it's in the thousands, and this is about how many applications that they've actually received regarding the Xbox One. One of the big questions that Microsoft have been asked, of course, is how are you going to promote indies? Obviously, with the PlayStation, they've got their own dedicated little section on, say, Steam on the PC. They've got a huge banner ad most of the time, and they all, of course, pop right up, so it's pretty much impossible to miss them. But Microsoft is saying, and I quote, there's been a lot of debate as what an independent developer. Is it Cappy with 2 people, or is it Crytek with 200 people? I think it's both, and it's everybody in between. There's too much focus on the financial structure as to whether they qualify to be an indie. For me, it means they are an independent of their own design decision, they're independent in thought, and they're independent on motivation and creative direction. The current structure of a retailer and publisher and financial investor in a studio invariably means that there is a load of executive producers. Executive producers are a good thing. They add value, but it also means certain kinds of games get built over and over again because they're more predictable in nature. They're more easy to forecast, easier to sell to a retailer, and easier to pigeonhole. So it's not exactly answering the question. And he also says that I don't think we're going to see things at launch. I don't think it's realistic to see a developer get the program and build a game and get to the market on November 22nd. It's a reasonable expect early 2014 we'll start seeing the first indie games come through. He was also asked about their first theories of the Xbox One. For example, their focus on the digital future, the delivery, DRM, sharing online content, and so on. There's an acceptance if you play in MMOs, and if you're connected to the internet. If you use Steam for games, there's a lot of connectivity issues there. DRM is accepted in some services more than others. When Microsoft announced the elements for the Xbox One, there was instant revulsion of that happening in console gaming. And then he was asked, well, what do you think of that? And Phil said, our long-term vision hasn't changed at all. We haven't diluted our long-term vision, which is all of the benefits of connected ecosystem and what that means for all of the stakeholders, us, developers, publishers, and crucially the players. None of this has changed. What we recognized was when you put a disk slot in front of a machine, certain expectations come with that disk slot. We had to adapt some of our policies, and it was the best thing to do before we launch, which we've done. And all we've handled in the vacuum of pre-launch activity, and it allows the player to have a choice. They can consume the content through the medium they like best and fits with their particular situation. I don't think there's a negative to that. Now, a very big question is how the consoles, next generation of consoles, are going to stack up against things such as mobile tablets. And do you think games consoles can still innovate in the digital space? A lot of digital innovation over the past couple of years has come from mobile tablets, app stores, and digital services, or are consoles always playing catch up as they have been for the last half of the gen? Phil responds that the Xbox Live and PSN marketplaces were stood up before the app stores and iOS. The biggest screen in the house, having the most powerful CPU and GPU attached to it, is still going to be the best place for a lot of game types. Not all, but we're starting this game across multiple screens, which is great for the industry. And if you want most sophisticated combination of CPU, GPU, input mechanism, biggest screen, and sound, it's going to be a console. Now, of course, this has been a very big problem. A lot of people are starting to wonder just how much of a future that consoles are going to have in reality. And Some are predicting doom and gloom, but some, of course, predict doom and gloom for everything. I'm fairly certain that we're going to see a very healthy next generation of consoles. There was initially talk from analysts just 1 or 2 years ago that we're going to be predicting to see very low sales of the next-gen consoles in relation to what we're seeing now with, say, the PS3 and Xbox 360. However, Microsoft and Sony are predicting they're going to be selling fairly damn well, and the PlayStation 4 is expected to sell about 5 million units early next year, so that's pretty damn impressive numbers. Phil was also asked why aren't digital console games cheaper to buy, and he responded, you could take that point of view, but you could also take the point of view that the only way in which our industry can continue to grow is if the margin structure enriches game development, meaning that much as the customer spends as possible accrues back to the creator. Striking a balance between those two extremes is going to be tricky, particularly when you have this direct A to B of Tesco selling a packaged version of the game and an online service selling a digital version, exactly the same bits, and pricing is easily comparable. What we're seeing is a trend where new business models that are going to exist only online are going to potentially be the ones that last the longest. Look at some of the free-to-play investments we're making at Xbox 360 with World of Tanks and Warface. They won't be retail experiences, but they will be digital experience. You won't have that direct A to B comparison. I don't think many people would agree with that, if I'm personally honest. I mean, there have been multiple theories as to why console games are more expensive digitally than what they should be. There's obviously the margin argument. Another argument is that the marketplace just isn't to the point we expect it to be. And there's another argument as well that various retailers have put a lot of pressure on, say, Sony and Microsoft, as well as, of course, the game's publishers, to ensure that the prices online are undercutting them substantially, and let's face it, they still need companies like GameStop and Game and whomever else to really retail and launch those titles. From the perspective of a good margin, I can understand it, but here's my only concern with this. Microsoft do want to push the digital medium, and I can understand that, and I accept that it has some benefits, but from my point of view, a lot of the time, the titles are actually more expensive online. I mean, they are, and that's a pain. I mean, why should I want to pay like £40 on Xbox Live or PSN, for example, when I can get it, say, 38 or 34 in store? And I'm obviously talking about Great British pounds here. I think this is going to be something that's going to have to evolve over time, and right now I don't really think there's a major answer. Obviously, free-to-play titles do have their place, but I do kind of feel that Phil was somewhat dodging the actual answer. So what about the production pricing on games? There was, of course, a lot of comments that games are costing more and more and more and more money to make, and some developers have said, well, we can't keep going on like this. AAA gaming is limited. We can't keep having this theory and this infinite money pit. Phil responded, the biggest production value games continue to be very expensive to build. The data points aren't so clear, but what's interesting to me is that what we call Gen 8, the Xbox One, is not 10 times the price of Gen 7, even though the format is about 10 times more powerful. Out of quote for a moment. Is not really 10 times more powerful in terms of pure performance, but whatever. That doesn't accrue to 10 times the development costs. We saw a huge jump between Gen 5 and Gen 6 and Gen 6 to Gen 7. So that would be like PS1 to PS2 to PS2 to PS3, or if you prefer the Xbox One to the Xbox 360, for example. It seems to be tailoring out, partly because of the better middleware and tools, and one artist being able to create more content for the workstation with efficiency in tool chains, and partly because games can now have initial releases and a series of downstream post-release expansions, which are more closely linked to audience size. In other words, DLC. So you don't have such a huge investment up front, but it's not about the total investment, because some of the games will be about hundreds and hundreds of millions of cumulative investments. So the real question is, how much of my peak negative cash flow before I get my first dollar revenue back, and how much have I sunk to the ground before I earn my first point of revenue? The first point of revenue is going to be earlier in the cycle, and that's good. A lot of this, of course, is pointing, and this is our quote, a lot of this, of course, is pointing towards shorter development times. Obviously, one of the reasons for the x86/64 architecture, primarily anyway, is for shorter development times, especially for indies, but also for AAA titles as well, since we're going to get a lot more crossover between the platforms that developers are obviously fairly familiar with coding for and so on, such as, say, the PC. Also, we know from previous instances that the jump to 1080p because of the high levels of fidelity, shadow maps and so on is also a bit of a pain. That isn't to say that I don't think that we're going to be seeing increases in cost, but I don't think, as Phil mentioned, it's going to be anywhere near to the point of, say, the PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2, or even, say, the initial games, like, I remember the Genesis to say the PlayStation 1. So, here's one for you. The Xbox One is not a games machine. The Xbox One is an entertainment box. Games are just these little things that Microsoft consider us to have, right? Is that true? Because a lot of people have said this. It's all over the forums, of course, that as the interviewer asked, you've been criticised for focusing on entertainment and sports rather than games. And Phil responds, the short answer is we built the platform to accommodate both. The longer answer is the technology choices and architecture choices we made in the OS allow us to seamlessly flip between the two in a very elegant way. On Xbox 360, to load a game, upload a game, load an app, upload an app, it takes time and therefore very difficult to support both behaviours of both states at the same time. It was laborious. What we did on the Xbox One was build an operating system that allows you to seamlessly switch between these two. You can have them both running at the same time by snapping one to the side of the screen and having the two coexist. But you can also have an instant 1 to 2 frames of time to switch between them. This increases the utility of the machine, increases the breadth of enjoyment you would get out of the console. End quote. Now, this has been a major argument that I've heard and a lot of criticisms that have been levelled at Microsoft. One of the big ones is, look, why have you focused so much on Kinect? Why have they focused so much on Kinect? And all these other nuances, but not on the games. And even on the initial unveiling of the Xbox One, we heard a lot about this. Now, Microsoft have tried to combat this by showing games, but still, people have said, well, we'd have preferred that rather you have all of this stuff to deal with multitasking and all the other, facilities, that you focus more on the games. It's very difficult right now to know just how successful Microsoft are going to be. Of course, they have an interesting operating system layout. They have basically a tri-operating system, one which is going to be orientated to, say, web browsing and so on, one which is going to be focused on running the games, and one kind of an orchestrator main overview operating system which is basically hosting the other two. Obviously, this does have a slight implication, for example, 10%, although that was before the upclock, so for all we know, it's about 8% now of the GPU, for example, is being placed on to the snapping of the various applications and basically being allocated towards the system. However, that was a rumour, that was confirmed back then, but we don't know, of course, what's happening now in regards to that. Finally, my friends, let us discuss the cloud. You remember how Microsoft were continuing to rave on about the cloud on the Xbox One's unveiling. And there was a lot of talk about cloud computing and how you could have, several Xbox One's worth of power in the cloud and so on. And then people started to really rage on it, started to talk about latency and so on. Microsoft tried to counter that, then more raging, and then they started to talk about other expansions. Well, anyway, how do cloud services factor into all of this, and how does the change of not games experiences but the hardware itself? Now you're not just focused on what's physically inside the box. Phil responds, we will see the cloud come into play this year with Forza Motorsport 5 and the Drivatar features. For those of you who aren't familiar, that basically means that the AI for the drivers on the Forza 5 can actually be powered by cloud, and supposedly it's about 600% more AI. We'll also be seeing a dedicated servers for COD, we'll be seeing a little bit later on in Titanfall and Connect Sports rivals using persistence in the cloud to really deepen the game experience. Some people will say that's just dedicated servers, there's nothing particularly unique about that, but it's the way in which it's providing the services to developers to make them really easy to access, the way in which we're creating the ubiquitous global coverage so that the quality of experience to the player is very high in a scalable way. Our experience with the cumulative knowledge in the Azure part of the business is second to none. We're leveraging all of that power. That's one of the things that's really impressed me about Microsoft and the Azure investments has been going on for some time. Multiple billions of dollars of investment behind the cloud. That's not some future promise, it's a real business now. Xbox Ones and Xbox 360 are high performance examples of our Azure business, but Office 365 and other parts of the business have multiple billions invested and trusted to our cloud. Microsoft is going through the reorganization to align these investments more tightly. Now let's talk about this just for a moment before we close off, because it's quite an interesting little topic. So if you're not unfamiliar about Azure, you can actually search for it. I've done a demo of actually what Azure is and how it functions, and I'm actually fairly familiar with it because we actually have a couple of Azure servers for work, for the business I work at. And they're very scalable. You basically can spin up a server, in other words, set it up, you choose what operating system, for example, you want, you set up the hardware, for example, the amount of RAM, the amount of processing power, the amount of hard disk, and so on, and then you basically allocate a virtual machine, which is all these are, really. They're running on massive servers, and then you set up a virtual machine. The basic premise is that you can spin up or shut down a server as you want, and therefore it'll only charge you based upon your usage. So in short, let's assume that you are a developer and you want a dedicated server. Let's assume that you budget that you need 100 dedicated servers, and let's assume that each of those machines costs you $1. Let's just make it that. So you've got 100 machines at $1. It's going to be substantially more than that, but let's just make this easy. That means it's going to cost you $100 a month, right? On the other hand, let's assume that you also have an Azure. Now, the thing is, if you're a player, there's going to be certain peak times you're not going to be playing. For example, let's assume that it's 3 o'clock on a Monday. You're probably not going to be playing the game if you've got work, or if you've got, say, school or college or whatever. On the other hand, there's also going to be times where it's a lot more busy. For example, Saturday afternoon, I can imagine that the servers are going to take a hammering. Therefore, you're going to need more. So what basically happens is the developers can write an application that in the back end will spin up a server, create new server instances as it's required, so that the hardware is always fairly smooth. It also means that because you can create servers based upon regions, so that means, for example, that European players won't necessarily have to worry about using a server in, say, America, or American players won't need to worry about a European server or an Australia server, or, you know, whatever server. You get the idea. That means that you're going to get much more consistency. It also means that for the development point of view and for deploying data, you can actually use their CDNs and so on. And this also goes into another thing that Microsoft have been talking about for a long time. They want to start making APIs that are application programming interfaces and programming much more consistent between all their devices. I'm sorry, just a hiccup there. There's not much to say about this other than it's still really early. And I guess we're just going to have to see what really happens. Now, I think the interview is quite interesting. He didn't really answer some of the questions exactly nail on the head. It was kind of half on the head at best, but there you have it. I guess this is about the best we're going to get, unfortunately. But regardless, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.